Welcome to this month's Lunch and Learn with Terry, Francesca, and myself. Excited to be back with you. Today, we are going to be talking about influence and how do we build influence? How do we maintain influence? And how do we do that in the non aggressive, direct, or overly manipulative, persuasive way? How can we do that? How can we better understand how each element is influenced, but also the way that they exhibit influence? And I'm really excited to dive into this topic. Before we do that, just in case we do have a couple of new people that maybe haven't experienced behavioral elements, Francesca, can you give us a quick rundown of the elements, where they come from, and what we're going to be talking about today?
Absolutely. And Jay, if you don't mind, may you change Terry and I's chat so we can interact with our lovely participants so that way when they flood through that chat, we can make sure we're interacting with them. So I want everyone, please drop in the chat what your element is. We're going to start with the fire. So if you're new here, the drive to acquire is what we call fire. So fire is a drive toward achievement, opportunity, results, and that forward momentum. So it's a big part of what makes us see something that we want to accomplish and says, let's go for it. So fire tends to be very much noticing the opportunities, wants to create momentum, wants to become energized by challenge, competition, accomplishment, and the possibility of what's next. So they're often asking, what's the opportunity? Whereas with water, the drive to bond, any of our waters out there, throw that in the chat, is our drive towards connection, relationship, belonging, and understanding people. So it's that part of us that pays attention to how decisions affect others and whether people around us feel included, heard, or valued. So water's often asking who's involved and how will this affect them. Air, any of our airs, throw that in the chat, please. Our air is a drive to learn. So air is that drive towards knowledge, curiosity, understanding, and possibility. It's that part of us that wants to explore an idea, ask the questions, gather the information before we kind of reach a conclusion. And air is often asking, why does this make sense? And what part don't we know yet? And of course, last but not least, any of our Earths in the audience, throw that in the chat, please. Earth is a drive of defense. Earth is that drive towards security, stability, and structure, that consistency. It's that part of us that really considers the risk and wants expectations to be clear and help us ensure that we're building towards something that's sustainable. So Earth is often asking, what's the plan and what could go wrong? Back to you, Jay.
Awesome. Thank you for that rundown. And it's awesome to see all of the people with their elements. If you haven't taken the assessment, you can do so at www.behavioralelements.com for free and learn what your primary element is. So let's dig in here. And we are going to, Terry, let's start with you. You, sir, being a primary air element, secondary in the water space, what does influence mean to you? How do you determine? And I think maybe let's start with the meta. What is the difference between influence, persuasion, manipulation, any of the other words that guiding? Like, what is the difference? How do you define influence?
It's interesting to me because I feel like I walk the line between influence, persuasion, and manipulation often, and I'm always really aware of when I might slide into what could be considered manipulation. So at the highest level, I think persuasion is when you have a very desired outcome you're hoping to achieve, and you communicate a vision generally to a person or a small group that is going to line the path to get from where they are to where you want them to go. I think that's persuasion. I think influence is maybe not as dialed into a particular situation, but it's a type of characteristic that we might carry with us that is a type of communication where we're like trying to create an impact, but we're not like solely dialed into one specific outcome. I think it's a lot broader than persuasion. And manipulation, I think, is when you are intentionally trying to get someone to do a thing by any means necessary. I'm not saying it's not as calculated as persuasion, because it certainly could be even more so. but I think it's persuasion without ethics, maybe.
I
And so that's how I would define them. Interesting question. What do you think of the answer? Because I just made all that up on the spot.
I think it's spot on. I honestly, I'll dig into that. But Francesca, why don't you weigh in? What is your thought?
I mean, it's very similar to Terry's, I think. It's not, yeah, and I guess it depends on who's doing it. I know that Jay always makes the joke that that's kind of his superpower. He's really good at the three of those, influence and persuasion and manipulation. But, I think it can be done in a way, especially in business, that's um, hopefully ethical, like Terry said. But I think that, I mean, it's kind of like what in terms of leadership in general, I mean, you think about management, people tell them a manager's telling you what to do, but a leader is actually inspiring you to follow them. I think that's what influence truly is people want to follow you. They're inspired to take that action, not because they're being manipulated or persuaded to, but they actually feel called to that. They're following the actions and not just watching someone's mouth, but watching their steps.
And so I'm loving this. And if we call those three pieces the triangle, I think that for me, I look at a little bit of, and it goes along with what you were saying, Terry. Influence to me is often a noun. It's, I have influence or I am influential. And I see persuasion more as the verb. It's the act. And if we're not cautious, this is where I think the dip into manipulation comes from is the question of intention. What is my intention? And if I'm not cautious, persuasion, good people can both be persuasive and manipulative. Bad people can be both persuasive and manipulative. I think that the act of persuasion is really modified by intentionality. Is what I'm persuading you to do going to cause you harm? Do I know that it's going to cause you harm? Do I know that it's going to create the conditions of hardship for you? Is it something that I'm putting you in a position to do that will lower your quality versus upraise my quality? That's where I would call that ethically manipulative versus persuasion of, I'm going to advocate that I want to see the new Spider-Man movie versus I want to see the new rom-com flick that just came out, right? That's not going to cause irreparable damage to anybody unless you're totally afraid of spiders and I've convinced you to go to it. Then it might be then it might be manipulation, like, oh, we're going to go see the rom-com flip. Just kidding. I've got you into Spider-Man, right? So there's an intentionality piece of it. But I think influence is, in many cases, what we have, our capability or almost our allowance for how persuasive we can be or we can become. So let's dig in on that question. Now that we've covered that, when we train on influence, anytime I'm training on influence, I share very clearly use this for good. Make sure that you're maintaining an ethical stance with your influence because influence can come from I have a job title and therefore I have authority or power. I have persuasive ability, right? Influence can come from I, you know, I have you owe me a debt. That could be a financial debt, that could be a personal debt or anything else. Use that resource or that influence in an ethical way. So now that we've covered that, all right. Terry, I haven't seen it. Don't tell me about it. I will lament with you on that question just a little bit later. All right. So
Perfect.
let's jump into influence. Terry, as an air and water, are there particular things that you find to be influential? Are there things that, let's say that somebody is trying to quote unquote persuade you in an ethical way, in a meaningful way, but they're trying to convince you of something, to change something, maybe an attitude, a belief, a concept, a behavior. What is particularly influential for you as an air element?
Impact and service. If you are going to try and influence me, you want to show me what the downstream impact or effect is. And if it's tied to being of service, something that's going to help others grow, move things forward, make a better whatever, you got me. I'm hooked. I'm in. I can't wait. Let's talk about this for 37 years and maybe nothing else ever. That would be amazing.
Okay. So, Francesca, coming at it from the fire and water side, what would you find particularly influential?
So I would say, I mean, I have the fire leading, but my water's pretty high and close to it. So as much as I want to see the results driven and, the success to be there, but the main underlying question for sure is, okay, who is this going to help? What's the impact created? So very similarly to Terry's model there. Um, I think too, there's a whole aspect that depends on like what the person's trying to influence me on, right? So I mean, if it's work related, it often will be a little bit more on the fire, side of things. Where if it's more personal, it's mostly always for me. What's going to persuade me is it's more on that water side. It's like, who am I going to be helping through this? So I think it really depends on the application because I was reflecting on this in terms of like my luxury development days. So I mean, in that work environment, everything that we did had to be results driven. At the same time, the whole reason I had the results was because I was people driven. The whole reason I was there is I wanted to see the people get into their new build home the day that we hand off the keys and we saw their build from the ground up. Of course, there's results there, but I think in terms of like someone persuading me, it would just have to have like a mix of both. But I just would want to know that whatever they're trying to persuade me on, is it ethically like going to actually help people, or is it just trying to benefit that one particular person that's trying to persuade me? That's what I would probably want to know.
Love it. So, from my side, fire and air is the secondary. I'm kind of a little mixture of both you and Terry on that regard, from the ideas and the goal focused. So, if it aligns with how I'm looking at potentially achieving the next level or hitting the next goal or whatever it is, then I'm going to be more susceptible to influence on it. If it is aligned with novelty, something interesting, something cool, clever, something that's like, wow, I've never tried this before, that is probably going to have some level of influential effect on me because I am naturally curious in a number of ways. But I'm loving some of these things, and I've got a couple of different directions that I want to go with this, but I am loving some of these comments in the chat. So we're going to dig into that here for just a minute. Team in the audience, please continue that chat because this is prompting some, I think, really good discussion. Relationships. Jennifer says, I think we need to build relationships before we can really influence. So my question to you is how important for both of you, and maybe Francesca, let's start with you. How you kind of alluded to this as you were talking about water and the people side of things. How important is the relationship to you to feel a sense of influence? Are there instances where someone has had influence where maybe you didn't have the best relationship? What was that experience like? What does that look like from your perspective?
I mean, an example that I can give, and I actually don't really know much about this particular CEO or founder, but I'm pretty sure the CEO or founder of Sephora specifically had quite an impact on a lot of different people with their views and how they wanted to inspire and help the people around that person. So I know that when that particular industry was kind of like fading off into a couple different directions, a lot of people really stuck with that Sephora brand, not because of necessarily the products that you get there. You can get those same products. I'm using this as an example, but you can get those same products at Ulta, at the Hudson's Bay, at Macy's. But it's they want to shop there because there is something about that particular leader that inspired them, and they're like, I want to support that person's brand. And I think similarly, like I have a previous business leader and mentor that I very much have always looked up to. And it's one of those things where I think it really won't matter. He's always said this, it really won't matter what exactly he does in his life. If he were to lose his billion-dollar company tomorrow, people are going to follow him. People are going to lead after him because there's something about him that like he cares about people so genuinely, so deeply that people want to see and then where he's going next. And if he decided to, I don't know, make a furniture company tomorrow instead of a AI or tech company, people wouldn't care. They'd want to follow his lead. So that kind of, I think, would be my aspect of that influence is it depends on the person, I think, behind it. Because I think that when all push comes to shove, I mean, even you, Jay, I think whether you decided to create behavioral elements in 2018 or you had decided to go in a different direction, the people that were invested in your journey were going to follow you wherever you were going because they were interested in the person behind it. And that's why I always say if you have a social media account, people don't want to just hear what you're doing for business. Terry does a great job at this, Jay as well, of course, but I really appreciate what Terry does on social media. It's not just about, hi, here's my offer, here's my sale. He's talking about him, his wife, his family, what makes him who he is. And that's what people want to follow. And that's where that influence comes in because they start to really respect the person and not just what they're doing. And that was a huge part of my business, even in real estate. I didn't just post sold posts. People get bored of those. People don't care, but people do care who's behind the message.
I love that insight. Terry, you want to build on that?
I think Francesca is right. And the word that keeps coming up as she was speaking was authenticity, right? And when I looked at, we used to do training on social media a million years ago. And Facebook always intrigued me because I thought it was a cool place to be able to show 360 degrees of our lives. Now, maybe you show 320. There's some things y'all are doing that I really don't want to see. I promise you. But the vast majority of the things that we get into, and I think when you let people know who you are and what you're about and why the things matter to you, those are all points of relatability. And ultimately, as Jennifer stated earlier, we need to build relationships before we can really influence. And let's be honest, we can't build relationships with every single one of our followers, especially if you're an influencer. But if you give them enough points of view into your life, they're going to self-select what they relate to, and I think that piece matters. And um Angela said that trust is a big factor, right? So when we talk about how we deal with the things that we deal with, and it's not just as Francesca said, just a sold another sold sign, but kind of the process, and we let people into our world a little bit. I think that's when people really start to make the decision to, like, I'm gonna follow this person anywhere, right? Because I just like how they are. And I'm a big fan of the belief that we tend to like people that we perceive are like us. And so if you can show them you being like them, human, I think that helps.
So, and it's interesting because obviously you two have played a huge role in this, but I've always struggled with like how much I'm willing to open up or to share or to be vulnerable or to talk about, things that are happening. And it wasn't until now recently that I've even talked about, being slightly neurodivergent in certain things. And it is interesting as, the logical part of my brain versus the emotional side of it in sort of experiencing sort of a connection to people in a different way. And that trust and that ability to sort of like be vulnerable, be authentic, I think is incredibly powerful. Here's a question that I have, and let's talk about influencers. You brought up the word, so I want to bring this up, and this is based on some of the studies. There's a number of different studies that I can relate that I can relay here, but one of the things that was fascinating, and this was from Carol Dweck's work on mindset and the mindful body. I think she references this. In the call it the 60s or maybe probably 60s ish, television comes out. There's a number, television's out. People have televisions in their homes. Commercials start coming out of these, and this is the 1960s, of these women who were essentially hand selected models that were in the commercials wearing beautiful dresses, done up, makeup, and everything else like that, that are cleaning the house with particular products. And one of the impacts of that, and this is a really interesting sort of historical study that they did, was the levels of depression amongst women at that time, having seen these television commercials. Now, they didn't relate this to this, they ended up studying this and finding this out, but there was a lot of sort of those individual people that saw this commercial with these beautiful models that are perfectly done up, wearing high heels, cleaning the house, and everything else like that. They saw that, and then they asked themselves, well, why am I not like that? Or why do I not look like that? And obviously, those things had a huge influence on how they perceived themselves. Fast forward to today, we've got a number of influencers out there. Sometimes there are friends, like actually we've met them and connected with them. So it doesn't even have to be the celebrity influencers of the past. Social media has created the conditions for normal, everyday people to become significant influencers. We don't always see everything, we see what's cultivated, what's curated. How do you maybe let's talk about how can we help protect ourselves from some of the influences that we receive or the influence that we get from seeing perfect lives on social media or seeing perfect representations, because there is a lot of that. And I think people hold themselves to a, well, why isn't my life like that? Why isn't it this easy for me? And I think that that influence has a huge impact on mental health, well-being, our self-esteem, and things like that. Do either of you want to comment on those types of influences that are maybe some of those perceptual influences that we see?
Going to the definitive book. Page 97 talks about the highlight reel. One of the biggest blessings and challenges of life today is navigating social media. And it goes on to say that exactly what you said, Jay. We're comparing the doldrum of our everyday life with the things that people have planned on posting or planned on doing for an exceedingly long time. And we're looking at a snapshot that's damn near their perfection and wondering why we don't have that, as if that is their every single moment. And it's just not, right? Most of us, um, life probably isn't nearly as exciting as like our Instagram reels may show. You know, the amount of time, especially in winter, and this is going to not be, I'm not going to belabor this point because it's kind of gross, but I have three dogs. And there's a lot of cleanup that happens with three dogs in piles of ice and snow. And every time I'm out there, I start taking pictures and like, can you believe this? And I'm going to make a post about it. And every time I stop, but I think about how it compares so much to the entrepreneurial journey that one moment we're closing big deals, we're putting excellent marketing plans together, we're making an impact in a room where it matters. And in that same day, we're literally shoveling dog shit. And that's the perfect metaphor of life in my mind. So they got that too. They just didn't post about it either.
The funny thing is I swear to you, before you even started talking about that, I was thinking about like, what are some of the mundane or kind of things? And I was like, well, going out and Francesca and I have a brand new puppy, and they do that quite frequently. Like, should I have a video of me talking about sometimes life gives you this, or something of that nature? That's funny. Francesca, do you want to weigh in on that?
Yeah, it's interesting, and I appreciate what you shared, Terry. I think, in regards to Jay's question, I think it can go one of two ways, right? So, like, there's a lot of influencers out there right now. I mean, especially in the last like 12 to 16 months, social media is definitely inundated with a lot of influencers that have you see the hashtag ad and the sponsorships and all the different stuff. And I have nothing against it. I mean, I respect it. It's how a lot of us are influenced to buy great products because they're being tested by so many more people. However, um, to exactly what we're saying, I think. there's such a fine line and a balance when it comes to that authenticity. I mean, I've even questioned myself, okay, if I ever were to take on a brand deal, I would have to, like, one of my like non-negotiables would be, if I don't truly love a product, I am not going to advertise it, right? But we don't even see that on social media. People just they get a deal and then they say how amazing it is when that's not how they feel. But aside from all the influencer world of things, for me personally, for those of you that have followed my social media for a long time, and those of you that haven't, I got onto social media, Instagram specifically, in say 2017, and I was sharing quite authentically. I'd went through a divorce at a very young age, never spoke an ill word about the person, only spoke about my journey, about my gratitude, my appreciation, what it taught me, how strong it made me, about my brother's passing, everything like that. And I was quite, what would be the word? I was quite vocal about just different things about life that people don't talk about. And it was always with the air of gratitude and appreciation. But that was one of the reasons why people chose to follow my account, because I stayed real about things that most people don't want to talk about. I mean, even when it came to my real estate exam, most realtors in Canada, the part of Canada I come from, the BC test, it takes about 2 to 3 tries because it's just mostly trick questions. So when I failed the first time and I failed by 1 point, I talked about it. I made posts about failure, all the different things, and real estate agents were shocked. They're like, we can't believe you said something. I'm like, but this is the reality. Why would we not talk about it? Most of you did it 6 times. Who cares? You're an incredible agent now, and this test has no relevance to the value that you bring to your clients. Why aren't we talking about failure more? That leader I talked about earlier, he's literally a billionaire. He's incredible. He's got his private jets. He dropped out of school in grade 10. And some of the best tech people out there that I know literally dropped out of school and didn't even graduate, but they're phenomenal. And they sit on university boards now. And, I let somebody, and this is something maybe someone in the audience can relate to, I let somebody's opinion 2 years ago make me not want to post about personal things anymore. I chose to really dial that back. And I've posted maybe 6 things in the last 2 years. And that's okay. It's given me a lot of time to reflect, to think to myself, what is it that I want to put out there? But I have made the decision that when I start posting again, I do want to be that vulnerable, authentic Francesca, because even though it may be cringy to some people out there, even those people start to have a shift of like, wait a second, this might be weird to read because I might not personally relate to that. But like Terry and Jay said, there's such a value to it because people need to hear our authentic feelings, because we pick up the shit at the end of the day. We're all doing the same things. And I think that the more that we're able to all start talking about this, that's one of the reasons we're so excited about something like our BE hub, because we want an authentic space to be able to talk about the things that most people don't feel comfortable to. So I appreciate, Jay, that you feel comfortable to talk about all this and to bring this to light, Terry, as well. Because I think we need more of it. Not just my personal 2 cents. The more authentic you can be out there, this world needs it. We've got enough fake stuff out there these days.
I love it. And I'm seeing comments from Tammy knowing the difference between reality and fantasy. And from Lisa, we see what people want seen on social media. We don't see what happens behind the scenes. And I think that's true. And a lot of times, I think that this is maybe the sort of larger takeaway from this is there's a number of different well-documented tools of influence. And I'm going to cite Dr. Robert Cialdini, kind of a master of influence, literally wrote the book titled Influence, that I think contribute to a number of these things. The comparisons, the looking at those different influential aspects. So let's shift gears here, because I'm seeing again something in the chat, and it's inspired a couple of comments. Large organizations, reputation and roles play a key role in influencing people you may not personally know. I've seen this, especially in the consulting world, like somebody in the organization who has a particular title that all of a sudden it's just like, wow, they must know everything. They must not make mistakes. Now, if you are that person, that's a lot of pressure. It's a lot of pressure to be the person that's supposed to have the answers, always have the answers, and that may influence how we show up. If you're the leader and you're expected to know the answer, you may be giving the answers that may not be the best answers because you're not willing to be vulnerable and say, you know what, team, I have no idea. What are your thoughts? That's a big challenge. It's also a big challenge that when that leader speaks, when people hear that leader, they don't necessarily, sometimes we don't question it because, well, they've got the title, they've got the role, they've got the experience. So there's no space for dialogue or conflict in there. let's talk a little bit about the reputation and the role and how that plays on influence for you. Francesca, let's start with you. You've worked in a number of different spaces. What impact does somebody's role, or whether they sign your paycheck, or whether they have a corporate title, what impact is that sort of? And I'm gonna use the word for these right now. It's an influence measure by authority. And when I say authority, that doesn't mean that they have like, police authority or anything like that, but there's a level of authority to influencers. There's a level of authority that celebrities have. There's a level of authority that we subscribe to in roles or in titles or anything else like that. How does authority impact, say, fire and water from your perspective?
It's an interesting question. I mean, I think that I may not be answering this the way that we want me to answer this, but I'm going to give you my honest feedback and then I'll give you like more of the business side of things. I think that one of the rules that I've tried to break over the years is not allowing that exact thing to happen. So, like, for example, when I worked in the real estate office, we had 100 plus agents, phenomenal, incredible. Everyone's incredibly talented. And there was a hierarchy depending on authority. We had the top team in the office. I was the executive assistant to the second to top team in the Okanagan. However, and don't get me wrong, I had high respect for both of those leaders because they were good people, not because of the amount of sales that they did. But most people were influenced by them heavily because of their power, or whatever you want to call it, in the city. But my thing that I always try to do is I'm like, who are the people in the office that don't get accolades, don't get that level of respect that those people do that they deserve? So our cleaners in the office, they're phenomenal humans. We don't know their stories. How can we get to know them more and have them have influence? Our receptionists, all those different people, the people that are pushing paper that literally make the whole office go around, but who's noticing them or allowing them to have some level of influence? So I always tried to have, I don't know, just be intentional about not having someone's title be everything because I've also experienced on the flip side of things, the second that that person doesn't have that title or that role, all of a sudden, wow, no one's paying attention to them. And it makes me wonder, like, how authentic really is this? So that was a huge part, even when I did developments, like it was, the tradespeople, like people pouring concrete. Every single person has a valuable role. And it's like, I think people have the authority that we give them, right? And don't get me wrong. I mean, I appreciate the people in our company that, like our CFO, who signs the paychecks. Don't get me wrong, I have absolute respect for him, but I have respect for him because of the person he is and the morals and values he has, how he chooses to treat me and the team. I mean, he can sign my paycheck, but if he wasn't a good person, would he have the same authority on my life? I don't think so. I choose to respect him because of who he is. So I know it's probably not the answer that we're going for, but that's how I authentically feel. And I feel like in general when it comes to people's titles. I don't know. It's interesting because I mean, even just recently in Behavior Elements, we were all given new titles, but I don't look at us any differently, right? Like Terry's CEO, but he's still the incredible friend and person that I know him to be. Jay is now the chief research officer, but he's still Jay. And I mean, no matter what title we have, I think it's like, who are we going to continue to be? And I think that's more the bigger question. And maybe why I love BE so much is because it's about the behavior. It's not because of what role we're in. So
I
Those
meant
are
to
my two
tell you,
cents.
we're changing all that. Titles are the only thing that matters moving forward, and just expect all kinds of new shit coming down. Just
Perfect.
so I'm saying.
Yeah, Terry, comment on the question of authority from an air perspective, air, water, and Francesca, thank you for bringing that up. The thing I love about this is there is no script, there is no right or wrong answer. This is the dialogue, and I think that we learn a lot by sort of taking those questions, and making sense of them from these different perspectives. So, Terry, share with us what is your thought from that authority side of things.
I'm gonna do my best to tight walk this line. You can respect the office. You do not have to respect the holder of the office. Those are very different. And Francesca alluded to it really well about like I'm aligned to the person you are, how you show up and how you show up for others. That is going to speak more loudly and more clearly to me than any extra words on your business card or your LinkedIn profile.
yep.
I see you for who you are and occasionally who you're not. And, I'm full of grace for people. Um, but I just because your title says X, Y, or Z, I probably don't care. But which means that if you're the janitor and you're the coolest cat in the building, I'm probably going to be more interested in hanging out with you than somebody else. Ted Lasso just came out with season 4 last week. Some of you probably have seen it. No spoiler alerts. I have not.
I am not.
Um, Nice, nice, nice. And then so I've been watching past episodes, and there was an episode where the hottest soccer football star in the world came to the team, and when he first got into the locker room, he said, "I am going to speak to the most important person on the team. Where is the kit man?" And the kit man is basically the equipment manager. And so he singled them out, got him some attention, called him the most important person on the team. Didn't know him, right? But it's such a different way to look at it. It's not just because your title says a thing. It's who you are and how you support others.
So I'm thinking in terms, I love this. In terms of the elements, I will tell you, as a fire element, authority is not a way to influence me. Telling me what to do, say pulling rank is a great way to turn me into an absolute enemy rather than, per se collaborating, creating space, giving opportunity. My fire will come out very, very strongly if somebody comes in with a form of dominance, and that's something. So arguments to authority are generally less persuasive to me. Now, they can be persuasive when it is one of those a team function. And this is what I had found is, if I had a captain on a hockey team that I played for, I would defer until that person either proved me wrong or anything else like that. So being in that team dynamic where we know that we're all on the same team and it's not being held over you or authority is being held over you, that can be influential. But for the most part, I tend to reject a lot of authoritative approaches to influence for me personally. I know that in some, authority and structure can be very persuasive because that's okay, well, this is the line of command, the chain of command. And that may appeal to somebody that is more on a structured side, say an earth or a water per se. But I think, again, using that influence in, I'll say, an ethical way is really important, going back to what you have both said about the relationship with the person. When we were talking about relationships or when we were talking about influencers, so we've talked about authority, social proof. That was really as it related to the influencers. When we see something or we see the crowd doing it or see a large swath of people doing it, that can have a lot of influence on us, particularly if we're affiliated or we feel connected to that crowd. This is often how we learn things is through social proof. So I wanted to bring those terms out because they are related to exactly what we're talking about in influence, the literature, and that aspect. Francesca, I saw you raise your hand. Go ahead.
Yeah, I have a question for you, Jay. So, I mean, in terms of fires, I know that you have said on like different podcasts or different aspects in the past that with you as like a higher fire, you are more so influenced by people's not necessarily rank, but like you are influenced and to some degree by people's titles because that's kind of where fires gravitate towards, right? Who's the most influential person in the room? We want to talk to them, meet them. Um, how does that relate for you in terms of keeping that balance of being persuaded by that? Because that heavy influence obviously is a huge factor of any high fire. But how does that look for you?
I think that that gets really nuanced because the most influential person in a room doesn't mean that they have the biggest title. There are some times, and I've learned this throughout the course of my career. Um, Working with NASA, if you want to actually know what's going on in the organization, you talk to the janitor. It's as simple as that. So it's not a question of authority or status. I think that that would be the difference or the differentiator. Status is not necessarily something that I'm attracted to. I've never been attracted to a role or a particular title or anything like that. when it becomes a question of authority, usually it is a question of who am I aligning with that's going to help me achieve our goals together or be able to move the needle forward with whatever project that we're working on. That's the person that's authority to me. That person may be the gatekeeper at the front desk that I need to create a powerful relationship with that's going to be able to call and get the things done. That's the kind of authority that I'm looking for, or the influence that I'm looking for. I'm trying to align with people that have influence in those types of situations, not necessarily the role, the title, or the authority. Does that make sense? But it's
Yep.
usually aligned with achievement of goals. It's going forward, pushing forward, getting the job done. Who do I need to work with in order to be able to be successful in that? And that's really how my fire would show up in terms of authority. Because a lot of times the authorities can also be barriers. And for me, it's like, okay, well, who am I going to align with that's going to help me navigate that barrier or get over that barrier in an ethical and an impactful way? So, all right, so we've got social proof, the influence mechanism. We have authority, the influence mechanism. Let's talk about how you attempt to influence. And obviously those two factors are big factors. There's a number of other influence measures that we take. If you were trying to influence, let's say that somebody on your team is an earth, high earth element, very systems focused, very process focused. How would you approach working to create influence with that earth element? And I'm going to kick it to Terry first, because I think this is, you know, Terry's got very low earth, and I'm being kind as he says. He has he has low earth. So Terry, when you're working with earth, obviously you've worked with a lot of earths. What is your approach? How do you create the conditions for influence and trust amongst earth elements?
It's interesting because I don't really distinguish this first part for any of the elements, right? It's kind of lesson one, step one is always the same, is to understand what matters most to them, right? So if we can get an idea of what's really important to you, that helps me shape the message I'm going to give next. And it doesn't matter if it's water, earth, fire, or air. That part is important. The second piece, and this is important to me, and I don't know how it lands for them, but I want to make sure that it's thought out, right? Like I try and contemplate the questions they're going to ask and answer them in advance and try to come up with like an actual plan. And I've learned this the hard way because I didn't do it for a very long time before learning anything about behavioral elements. Not that I was a brute force kind of guy, but I was such an optimistic communicator that I just felt like you'd get wrapped up in my energy and be excited, enthusiastic, and move forward. And I would take silence as agreement, not as overwhelm, not as misunderstanding, not as this guy's off his rocker, but silence to me was all in. So with Earth in particular, I try and give not necessarily full blown details, but enough info concisely to get them to see my point of view. And then I ask very specifically, what do you think? What's your take? How would you do this?
Mm-hmm.
So that's the approach.
I
And
love
thank you,
that.
Judy.
Kind of
With
bringing
air
that
and air,
dialogue.
earth, oh my goodness.
One of our rarest combos. I love it. Francesca, your thoughts on influence, and you can choose to influence Earth, or maybe if it's influence for any of the elements. What are your thoughts?
Sure. If we're starting with Earth, I would say authentic influence would have a large part about building that credibility through that consistency. So if I'm walking into a room incredibly excited about an idea, but I haven't necessarily considered the implementation or the risk or responsibility or what's going to happen next. Earth may seem like they're resisting to the idea, but it's more so that they're trying to protect us from something we haven't actually gone through yet. So rather than trying to overpower that caution, I think the best thing to do is to respect it. So saying something like, here's what I'm proposing, here's what would change, here's what would stay consistent, and here's the process I'm recommending, and here are the risks I've already considered. So I think that there's uncertainties. You just need to be honest about them, not promising Earth that something's risk-free when it isn't, and instead just saying, here's what I don't know yet, and here's how we'll manage it. So that way we can really stay true to what we're trying to present to them and really not trying to beat around the bush of the fact that yes, everything's going to be perfect when we don't know. So I think the biggest thing for Earth is just being prepared, consistent, and as clear as we possibly can, and give them a process, some expectations. And I think evidence is a huge part of that too, and some timelines. And of course, if we have risk considerations, all the better.
I love that. So I'm going to take a different approach here, and I'm going to start with if I'm trying to say influence a fire. All right, so you can jump in on this so that way we cover all four elements before we finish. As a fire, typically I am influenced by sort of two different pieces. Is one, has the influencer or the person sharing or trying to influence me, have they shown up in the past? And I'm going to put this in there because I never had a word for it, but this is the work of Dr. Levine, who does a lot on attachment stuff. Have they shown up as CARP? Consistent, available, reliable, responsive, and predictable. I tossed that into the chat for everybody. But for me, I'm highly influenced by people who are consistent, where I'm not necessarily having to guess, where they're available, where they're, open and maybe a little curious, where they're reliable. I know I can count on them, that they're responsive when I need them to be, and again, that we can predict it. So CARP behaviors, and I'm also highly influenced when people create the conditions of saying, hey, we both want the same thing. We're going towards the same direction. We're heading towards the same goals. Reminding me of that can be a really, really powerful thing to align myself from an influence. Terry, or actually, let's go to Terry on this one because Terry is not fire in the first two spots. Terry, how do you influence fires given that you're talking to two of us on here right now?
You tell me, have I influenced either one of you ever in my entire life? I mean, my goodness. You know,
Absolutely.
I'm gonna use a line that I used with a coaching client earlier that I've heard you both use a few times since we've met. And it's kind of paint a picture of what done looks like, right? To me, the idea of creating a vision that somebody wants to see themselves in is the powerful way to get them from where they are to starting to think about doing what you want them to do. So I never try and tell anyone how to do the thing, right? I don't want to take away the autonomy. I don't want to take away the experience. I don't want to take away their better idea of how to do something. But I do want to say, done, looks like this. And they either quickly, especially for fire, if it's going to help them win, if it's going to help them achieve, it's going to help them grow and gain more. They're probably going to want to see themselves in that picture and they're going to build on it. And I think the real key with fire is to say what you need to say, shut the heck up, and let them spin things up. You tell me how that lands for you both, high fire peoples.
Lands for me. I'll let Francesca answer, but Cecilia had asked a question earlier that kind of to your point. Influential tactics, sentences or buzzwords, which ones are more effective? As a fire, for me, give me the give me the buzzwords, give me the quick hits, the anything else. I want to know quickly so that way I can make a quick decision and move on. I would say that some of the other elements may be looking for more of the sentences, the structure, the information. The lower part of the wheel, air, or I'm sorry, earth and water, generally is going to be probably be more sentences, more discussion, more open. The air and the earth, a little bit more unstructured, probably buzzwords, probably a little bit more of the give me the quick hits, let us think about it, let us take action and move forward. So I hope that that potentially answers that question towards the elements. Are there certain words that help influence? Yes, there are power words out there. We can even cultivate a list of that. So let me put a little energy into that and stay tuned. I'll get some of those out to you, Cecilia. Francesca, do you want to tackle that? And in the interest of time, there's two other questions that were posted. I want to make sure we cover too. So, thoughts on the fire influence?
Yeah, I was gonna make a joke. I don't even think Terry views me as a fire. I think to him I'm more water. So this is kind of entertaining and I love it. But I think when I'm communicating with someone that has more of the strong fire, the biggest thing is don't bury the opportunity underneath 20 minutes of context. Help them see where we're going, what's possible, and how their role would help us get there. So just saying something as simple as, here's what I see as an opportunity, here's what we could accomplish, and here's why I think you're important to making it happen. And just give them the room. Let them go. If you give them a plan, they're not going to feel that autonomy of them getting to step up and really take that action. So the more clear, confident, concise, and action oriented you can make the pitch or whatever you're trying to give to them, do that. And if you can give them the outcome, they're going to be like, okay, cool. I've got the autonomy to do it, and they'll roll with it. So that's my 2 cents.
All right, this is lightning round. I've got one question for Terry. Terry, give the quick answer to this. Judy asked earlier, how do you think AI is going to impact influence in the future? Give us your thoughts on that question.
Everybody's going to become way more cynical because they're not going to know whether or not it was you or AI. So you're going to have to do something that proves your authenticity and that it's really you bringing this to the forefront.
Love that. That's a great answer. Francesca, the question for you I'm posing. Lisa says, I need to know how to influence my partner, how to be better with money. We're not going to make a value judgment there. She says he is terrible. How do you influence in terms of money or finances? Francesca, what would you approach?
I'm not giving advice on this. I love it. Maybe we'll pass that to Angela Fossey in the audience, who is one of the operators in that space. But no, I would say, Lisa, just in terms of influencing anyone for change, I think that the more encouraging that we can be and just getting the vision together. One of the things that, all three of us try to say in our trainings is that you want to become that person's ally. And Jay says it's a lot in his trainings. It's not about you need to do this and hey, Bob, you need to be better with your money. It's like, hey, I don't know what your husband's name is, Lisa, but today his name's Bob. Bob, you know what? We're working really, really hard on getting that particular boat. We really want to get that in 5 years. I know that it kind of seems silly when we're buying Starbucks. It seems like it's only $5, but I actually calculated it. And if we save going to Starbucks once a week, even, this is how much money we're saving. And I thought you and I together, if we could even just cut back a little bit on this, look what we could get to in 2 months, 3 months, 4 months, but make that you want to be that person's ally. And the more that you can do that together as a team, it's not you against them, it's you and him against whatever the problem is. And if you include yourself, make a spreadsheet together. Jay and I do that. We have a spreadsheet and we're like, hey, how can we accomplish this? And it's amazing. It's a nice team building exercise and and have humor in it, right? The more that you can laugh and joke with each other, the better because life's not too serious already. So that's my advice.
I love the answer and I'll echo it. I'm terrible with money. I'm very impulsive. But if you give me a goal or point me in a direction of what we need to do, what we need to accomplish, I'm very creative and that's where I will thrive. If you just leave me to, okay, I have a credit card, we're in trouble. All right. So if that's what you're experiencing, give them a goal, give them focus, and give them the reward at the end of that goal. And that is also generally a powerful way to influence at least a fire element like me. All right. We are at the end of our hour, folks. I know that conversation happened so fast. This was a lively one. I want to say thank you to everybody for all of your comments in the chat, the questions. This has been really great to be able to interact and engage on those different things. Terry, Francesca, thank you as always for your insights and knowledge. Last words in 10 seconds or less, Terry.
Be intentional about what you actually want to influence.
Awesome. Francesca.
I think the biggest thing I would lead off with or finish off with would be like pressure says, see it my way, but influence says, let me understand yours. And I think the more that we can help other people understand or help us understand other people's perspectives, the more influence and impact that we can create around us.
Amazing. My last comment is if you want to continue some of these types of conversations, dig in deeper on the issues, Check out the BE community that we're building. This is an opportunity for you to connect even at a deeper level, get personalized coaching and more opportunities in addition to this Lunch and Learn, which we are going to come to a close here today. So thank you so much for joining us. As always, we look forward to these on a monthly basis. Until next time, friends, be safe, be healthy, be well, and take care. Bye, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.